During my baby's lavish first birthday party, I watched my mother dump cold soup onto my in-laws' plates and tell them, "Eat quickly and disappear." In front of 50 tables crowded with guests, I said only one sentence, took their hands, and walked away. None of them knew that before the evening was over, I would freeze $18 million in family assets and set an investigation in motion that would tear my own family apart. The paper was still warm from the printer in my hand when I read it the third time, trying to make the letters mean something different than what they meant. Guarantor, Arthur J. Whitfield. I know Arthur's signature. I've watched him sign the check at the Cracker Barrel, with his readers pushed down his nose and his tongue caught between his teeth like a kid taking a spelling test. This wasn't that. This was smooth, practiced. The kind of signature that's been written enough times that the hand stops thinking about it. Arthur has probably signed his own name 4,000 times in 61 years. This one had been written more than that, by somebody who wasn't him. The SUV was still idling in the hotel valet line in Scottsdale. Arthur was asleep against the window with his hat in his lap. Eleanor was watching the fountains outside like she'd never seen anything that expensive, not attached to a wedding. Neither of them had any idea that 30 minutes earlier, in a house they'd just been humiliated in, I'd read a document that put their names on $6 million they had never touched. I didn't wake them. I got out, walked to the far side of the parking structure, and called Marcus Webb. Marcus has been my CFO for 12 years. He was the first hire I made after my father's stroke put me in the chair nobody wanted me in at 31. He doesn't call after 10 at night unless the number in front of him is one he's already checked twice. Say it slow, I told him. There's a loan receivable on Meridian Coastal's books, he said. 6.1 million, structured across 4 disbursements over the last 4 years. Personal guarantor listed as Arthur J. Whitfield. I pulled the file because the auditors flagged it for our institutional investors' year-end review. Alex, I've been CFO here 12 years. I have never met this man. I didn't even know he existed until 40 minutes ago. He's my father-in-law, I said. He runs 60 acres outside Beatrice, Nebraska. He does not have $6 million. He does not have $6,000 sitting around to guarantee anything. There was a pause on the line long enough that I heard Marcus's own kitchen clock ticking in the background. Then somebody built a paper trail that says otherwise, he said. And I need you to understand what that means for the books. If Arthur Whitfield isn't real collateral, we don't have a receivable. We have a $6 million hole with his name taped over it. I told myself, standing in that parking structure with the desert wind kicking up trash against the concrete pillars, that it was probably a filing error. Somebody at the bank had transposed a name. Somebody had reused an old template from 7 years back, when Arthur really had gone to a lender on my behalf and just never scrubbed his information out of the system. I believed that for about 4 hours. It got me through the drive home, through carrying Ethan up to his crib, through lying next to Maya while she cried herself out over what my mother had done to her parents in front of 300 people. It stopped being believable at 6:14 the next morning, when Marcus sent me the other 3. 4 loans, not one. Structured 2 years apart, each one just under the threshold that would have triggered a secondary compliance review. Total draw, $6.1 million, funneled through a subsidiary called Meridian Coastal Holdings, a shell I didn't even know we still had open. And on every single one, in that same smooth, over-practiced hand, Arthur J. Whitfield, guarantor. My hands weren't steady when I called Gregory Pierce. Gregory has been our family's attorney for 20 years. He did my parents' estate planning, my prenup, the trust that pays for Ethan's college before Ethan can spell his own name. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he already knew why I was calling before I said a word. Alexander, it's early. I need the originals of the Meridian Coastal Guarantor Agreements. All 4. Notarized copies. Today. A pause. Longer than Marcus's had been. Those documents are part of a broader family financial structure your mother manages, he said, choosing every word like it cost him money. I'd need to loop in Diane before I release anything, even to you. You understand? Client confidentiality runs in more than one direction in this office. Gregory, my name is on the masthead of that company. I am the CEO, and you're telling me you need my mother's permission to show me a signature. I'm telling you, he said, that it would be prudent to have a conversation with her first. I hung up on him. That was the first time in 7 years I'd hung up on Gregory Pierce, and it was the first time I let myself think the sentence I'd been avoiding since 6:14 that morning. My mother did this. I told myself it still might not be true. That's the thing nobody tells you about finding out someone you love is a liar. You don't leap to the conclusion. You crawl to it, on your hands and knees, looking for any exit that isn't the one right in front of you. So instead of confronting her, I did the responsible thing, the thing that felt, at 7 in the morning with my stomach in a knot, like due diligence instead of what it actually was, stalling. I hired Priya Nair. Priya is a forensic accountant out of Phoenix, CPA, 14 years specializing in shell structures and asset tracing, the kind of person hedge funds call when they think their own partners are skimming. I'd used her once before, when a vendor tried to double bill us on a hotel renovation. She didn't ask why I needed her on a Sunday. She just asked for read access to Meridian Coastal's ledgers and told me to give her 48 hours. It took her 31. The 4 disbursements didn't stay in Meridian Coastal. she told me, sitting across from me at my own dining room table with 3 laptops open, and Maya's coffee going cold beside her because she'd forgotten it was there. They moved within 72 hours each time, routed through 2 intermediary accounts, and landed in a property holding entity called Bellwood Cove LLC, Naples, Florida. I don't know that name. You wouldn't. It's not tied to Ashworth Meridian on paper. It's tied, through 2 more layers, to a single individual. She turned her laptop around. Diane R. Ashworth. I sat with that for a long time. Long enough that Priya quietly closed her laptop and told me she'd email the full report and let herself out. Bellwood Cove, it turned out, was a boutique resort my mother had been secretly financing for 3 years. A passion project she'd started after a falling out with her business partner on a similar venture in Charleston. One she'd never told my father or me about because, as I'd learn later, she'd already burned through her own money and needed a way to keep pouring more in without anyone at the company asking where it was going. The resort was underwater. Cost overruns, a hurricane that delayed opening 18 months, a construction lawsuit nobody had told me existed. She needed $6 million nobody would notice was missing, so she didn't take $6 million. On paper, she loaned it to a 61-year-old wheat farmer from Nebraska who has never once, in the 11 years I've known him, asked me for a single thing. I want to tell you I went straight to the police. I didn't. I did what people do when the person who hurt them is still, somehow, their mother. I gave her one more chance to make it not true. I drove to her house that afternoon. She was in the sunroom in a robe, holding a mimosa like the party 2 nights earlier hadn't ended with her own son overturning a table in front of the Harrington family and half the club board. I need you to tell me Arthur Whitfield never guaranteed a loan from this family, I said. She didn't even put the glass down. That man let your wife starve for attention her whole childhood and you're worried about his credit? She said. Sit down, Alexander. You look unwell. That's not a no. It's paperwork, she said. And there it was, the first crack. So small I almost missed it, in a voice that had never once in my life admitted to being wrong about anything. Old paperwork from years ago. When your little farmer was so eager to save you, he'd have signed anything. Nobody's collecting on it. It's a formality. 4 loans, mother. $6 million. Actively drawn against 4 separate years. Routed to a resort in Naples with your name on the deed. The glass finally went down. You've been going through my accounts, she said, and her voice had changed entirely. Not guilty. Not scared. Cold. That's a felony, you understand. Unauthorized access to. I'm the CEO of the company that owns the entity those funds moved through. I'm not going through your accounts, mother. I'm going through mine. She stood up, robe pulling tight around her, and for a second I saw something I'd never once seen on her face in 34 years. The tiniest flicker of a woman doing math she didn't like the answer to. Whatever you think you found, she said, you will destroy this family chasing it. Think very carefully about whether some redneck's credit score is worth that. I left without answering her. That was my failed attempt to fix it quietly, and it failed exactly the way those attempts always do. Not because I didn't try hard enough, but because you cannot reason someone out of a lie they've spent 3 years building a resort on top of. 2 days later, the second loop started, and this one didn't happen in a sunroom. It happened at Arthur and Eleanor's kitchen table in Beatrice, Nebraska, 400 and some miles from anyone who could talk their way out of it. A man from Farmers Trust Bank called Arthur directly on a Tuesday morning, told him his account was flagged for review pending a fraud referral related to loans totaling over $6 million in his name, and that if he didn't respond to a certified letter within 10 days, the bank would move to place a lien against real property listed as collateral, which was, as it turned out, the 40 acres and farmhouse Arthur had left after selling off everything else to save my life 7 years ago. Eleanor called Maya crying so hard Maya couldn't understand her for the first 2 minutes. When she finally got the story out, Maya went white and handed me the phone without a word. Arthur, I said, I need you to not say anything to that bank. Not a word, not a signature, nothing. I have a lawyer. A real one, and I need 48 hours. Son, he said, and his voice had that flat, farmer calm he uses when a storm's coming, and there's nothing to do but watch it. They said fraud. They said my name's on paper for money I never seen a dollar of. I don't understand how a man my age ends up looking at prison for something he didn't do. That's the sentence that took the floor out from under me. Not the 6 million. Not even the lien. Looking at prison. Because up until that phone call in my head, this had been a financial problem. Funds to trace. Documents to pull, a conversation to have with my mother that would eventually end with an apology and a wire transfer undoing all of it. It had never once occurred to me that the bank's fraud referral wasn't aimed at my mother. It was aimed at Arthur. He'd never once been near this money, but his name was the one notarized on the guarantor line. And banks don't chase shell companies. They chase names. I called Gregory Pierce again. This time, I didn't ask nicely, but his name was the one notarized on the guarantor line. And banks don't chase shell companies. They chase names. I called Gregory Pierce again. This time, I didn't ask nicely. I need those originals in my hand by end of day, or I am hiring outside counsel and filing a bar complaint against you personally for obstruction, I told him. You drafted these, Gregory. Your notary stamp is on at least 2 of them. You are not a bystander here. The silence this time was different. Longer. heavier. "Come to the office," he finally said, alone. When I got there, Gregory looked like a man who hadn't slept. He slid 4 folders across his desk without a word. "I want to be very clear," he said, "that I drafted these documents at your mother's direction, believing at the time they reflected a legitimate family arrangement. I did not know Arthur Whitfield had not signed them. Did you notarize them?" "I notarized 2. The other 2 came back to me already executed, with a notary stamp I don't recognize." "Whose stamp?" He hesitated long enough that I understood, before he even said it, that this was going to get worse before it got better. "I believe it belongs to your mother's assistant, Patricia Lindqvist. She's a licensed notary in Arizona. I never confirmed she was present for the signing." I left his office with 4 folders and a name I'd known for years without ever once thinking about. Pat Lindqvist, who'd been answering my mother's phones and booking her flights since I was in college, who sent me a Christmas card every year with a picture of her golden retriever, who I now understood might be the one person on earth who could physically prove, with her own hand, what my mother had done. I called Priya back in and gave her the folders. She flagged something within an hour that Gregory hadn't caught, or hadn't wanted to. "The pen pressure's wrong," she said, sliding 2 signatures side by side under a desk lamp. "This isn't a professional forger. Whoever signed this was writing fast, under pressure, probably copying from a sample signature held in the other hand. See how the downstroke on the WR breaks instead of curving? That's someone who's practiced a signature maybe 30, 40 times, not someone who's spent a lifetime writing it like Arthur has. Can you prove that in court?" "I can flag it," she said, "but you want a certified forensic document examiner for that, someone who can testify." That was the first time I understood this wasn't going to stay inside my family. It was going to have a courtroom in it. The 3rd loop hit 2 days after that, and it's the one I still can't think about without my hands doing the thing they did that night. Eleanor collapsed at her kitchen table at 9:40 on a Thursday night, clutching her chest, and Arthur called 911 with a voice I've never heard a grown man use before. She was airlifted to Bryan Medical Center in Lincoln. Maya and I got on a flight 40 minutes later without packing anything but Ethan's diaper bag. Eleanor's cardiologist, Dr. E. Farah Deeb, met us in the hallway outside the ICU at 2 in the morning, still in her scrubs, exhaustion written into the lines around her eyes. "It presented as a stress cardiomyopathy," she told us, "what people sometimes call broken heart syndrome. It's not a myth, it's a real physiological event, usually triggered by acute emotional trauma. Her heart's left ventricle temporarily lost its normal pumping shape. She's stable, but I won't pretend this wasn't serious." A sustained shock like that at her age with her blood pressure history. We got lucky. Maya sat down on the hospital floor because her legs stopped working. I stood there with Ethan asleep against my shoulder and did the math on what sustained shock meant. It meant a 60-year-old woman's heart had physically broken because a bank had told her husband he might go to prison for a crime that had my mother's fingerprints all over it, and I still hadn't gone to the police. I made the call from that hallway, not to a detective yet, to myself first, the promise that whatever loyalty I still owed my mother had officially run out somewhere between the parking structure in Scottsdale and this hallway in Lincoln. The next morning, I drove to the County Financial Crimes Unit and asked for whoever handled bank fraud referrals. I got Detective Renee Castillo. Castillo's been with the department 14 years, the last 9 in financial crimes. She had a way of listening that made me feel like she'd already heard versions of this story before and knew exactly which parts people tended to leave out. "Walk me through it from the beginning," she said, "slow, and bring me everything, every document, every email, every name." I gave her Priya's report, the 4 loan folders, Marcus's audit flag, and the timeline. She read for almost 40 minutes without saying a word, then looked up. "Here's your problem," she said. "Right now, on paper, this looks like loan fraud committed by Arthur Whitfield. The bank's referral names him. Until we can conclusively establish these signatures are forged and trace directive intent back to your mother, the county attorney's office is going to keep moving forward on the referral they already have, which is a fraud case against your father-in-law. He's 61 years old. He's never so much as run a red light." "I believe you," Castillo said, "but belief isn't evidence, and I need a certified forensic document examiner to formally establish forgery, plus a documented chain showing who directed it and who benefited. Right now, I have suspicion and a forensic accountant's informal flag. I need more before I can get a prosecutor to redirect a case that's already been filed against the wrong person." She gave me a name, Dr. Lillian Cho, a certified forensic document examiner who'd testified in 11 federal cases and consulted for the FBI's document lab. I called her office that afternoon. Dr. Cho took the 4 originals, 3 known Arthur signatures pulled from old farm equipment titles going back a decade, and a sample of Pat Lindqvist's handwriting pulled from her notary logbook. It took her 5 days. Structurally, these 4 guarantor signatures are inconsistent with one another and inconsistent with your comparison exemplars from Mr. Whitfield, she told me over the phone, in the flat, careful language of someone used to being cross-examined. But they are consistent with each other in stroke order, pen lift pattern, and a repeated hesitation at the terminal D. That tells me one person wrote all four, practicing from a model signature, likely the same person each time. I can state with reasonable scientific certainty these are not genuine signatures of Arthur J. Whitfield. Can you tell who wrote them? Not definitively, without a suspect exemplar to compare, but I can rule someone in or out if you get me one. I already had a guess. What I didn't have yet was Pat Lindqvist willing to give me her own handwriting on purpose. That's when my mother, for the first time since the sunroom, came to me instead of the other way around. She showed up at my house at 7 a.m., no appointment, mascara imperfect in a way I'd genuinely never seen on her in my entire life. Maya took Ethan upstairs without being asked. "You went to the police," my mother said. "It wasn't a question. You put a 61-year-old man's name on $6 million of your debt. You put him in front of a felony charge. His wife had a heart attack because of what you did. I never intended for it to reach him personally," she said, and for 1/2 of 1 second, I thought I might be about to hear something close to an apology. Then her voice sharpened back into the one I'd known my whole life. "It was never supposed to be discovered at all. If your little audit hadn't happened, no one would ever have known, and Arthur Whitfield would have gone to his grave never once being inconvenienced by any of it. That's your defense? That I wasn't supposed to find out?" "My defense," she said, "is that everything I have ever done, I have done to hold this family together, while your father sat in that chair and drooled at the television, while you nearly got yourself killed over a land deal I told you not to touch, while this company, the company my father built, nearly collapsed because none of the men in this family could hold a business together without me propping it up from behind a curtain. I built Bellwood Cove because I needed something that was mine, something with my name on it that no one could take credit for. And I will not apologize for finding a way to protect it that didn't cost this family a single dollar it would ever have missed. It cost Arthur his home. It nearly cost Eleanor her life. Farmers," she said, "are resilient. I don't think I've ever felt something crack in my chest the way it cracked in that moment. Not rage, exactly. Something colder than that. The last piece of me that had still been protecting some childhood version of her. Some woman who used to sit on the edge of my bed when I was 7 and tell me stories, finished dying right there in my kitchen. Get out of my house," I said, "and call Gregory. Tell him to stop taking my calls, because from this point forward, everything goes through Detective Castillo." She left without another word. I found out later, through Marcus, that she spent the next 6 hours trying to wire the remaining $2 million, still sitting in a Meridian coastal account, the last piece not yet caught in the 18 million freeze, to an account in the Cayman Islands, before the freeze order Marcus had initiated the night of the party could fully propagate across every linked account. The bank flagged it as suspicious at 4:52 that afternoon and held the transfer for review. It was the single dumbest thing she could have done, and it was also the thing that changed everything, because attempted concealment of assets under an active investigation is its own crime. And it's the piece that finally got Special Agent Daniel Osei of the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division on the phone with Detective Castillo by that evening. Once funds cross state lines electronically, and there's an attempt to move them offshore mid-investigation, this stops being purely a county matter, Osei told me when Castillo brought him in. He'd been with the Bureau 11 years, 7 of them in financial crimes. Wire fraud, attempted concealment of assets, aggravated identity theft if we can establish she directed the use of Mr. Whitfield's identifying information without consent. That's federal. I'd like everything you have. Today, if possible. I gave him everything. Priya's report, Dr. Cho's findings, the 4 folders, Marcus's audit flag, every email I still had access to as CEO. And then, at 1:14 in the morning, 4 days before Arthur's county fraud hearing was scheduled, the hearing where a prosecutor who didn't yet have enough to redirect the case was going to have to decide whether to proceed against a man who'd never done anything wrong in his life. My phone lit up on the nightstand. It was Pat Lindqvist. "I can't sleep," she said when I picked up. Her voice was shaking. "I've worked for your mother 19 years. I have a granddaughter starting community college in the fall. I did not sign my own name to any of this, Alexander. She told me it was a formality. She told me Arthur had verbally authorized it and just couldn't make it to the notary in person because of the farm. I believed her. I want you to know I believed her." Pat, I need you to say all of that to Detective Castillo, tonight if you can. "I have the emails," she said. "She never wrote anything down that could be traced directly. She's smarter than that. But I kept things. I always kept things because some part of me knew, deep down, that a day like this was coming. I have 4 years of instructions. Times, dates. I have a recording too from 8 months ago when she called me from her car and I had it on speaker while my hands were full. I didn't plan it. She called me from her car and I had it on speaker while my hands were full. I didn't plan it. I just never deleted it. She met Castillo and Osei at 3 a.m. in a diner parking lot off I-17 because she said she couldn't stand the thought of anyone seeing an unmarked car outside her house. She handed over a flash drive, a stack of printed emails, and a phone recording of my mother's voice clear as anything saying, "Use the old sample from the loan 7 years back. Nobody at that bank has ever laid eyes on the man. Just make it look tired, Pat." Old men's hands shake. 22 hours before Arthur's hearing, morning, Agent OC called me. "We have enough," he said. "Forensic document examination establishing forgery, a cooperating witness with direct instruction on tape, a financial trail showing benefit, an attempted concealment of assets mid-investigation. I'm not going to pretend the next 24 hours will be simple, but I need you to trust the process from here. Let us do our jobs." I didn't sleep that night, neither did Maya. We sat up with Eleanor's hospital bag still packed by the door from a week earlier, because some part of both of us was convinced something was still going to go wrong at the last minute, that my mother, who had spent 30 years being the smartest person in every room she walked into, would find one more angle none of us had accounted for. She almost did. At 8:40 the next morning, 2 hours before Arthur's hearing was set to begin in Lancaster County, my mother's own attorney, not Gregory anymore, a new criminal defense lawyer named Whitmore Grant she'd hired the day the wire transfer got flagged, called the county attorney's office and tried to argue that the entire forensic case against her should be thrown out because Pat Lindqvist's recording had been obtained, in his words, through emotional coercion by a family member with a financial interest in the outcome. For about 40 minutes, I genuinely believed it might work, that the same woman who'd poured cold soup on Arthur's plate 2 weeks earlier might walk out of this the way she'd walked out of every consequence in her entire life, gliding just above the reach of whatever was supposed to catch her. Judge Karen Whitmore, no relation to my mother's lawyer, a coincidence that felt almost cruel, heard the motion at 9:15 that morning, in a preliminary hearing that had originally been scheduled for a different case entirely. She reviewed Dr. Cho's forensic report, Priya's financial trail, and the recording itself, and she took 11 minutes to deny the motion. "The recording was volunteered by the witness of her own accord," she said, reading from her notes with the flat precision of someone who has heard 1,000 desperate motions and stopped being moved by any of them. "There is no evidence of coercion, family or otherwise. The motion is denied. We will proceed." At 11:02 that morning, in the same Lancaster County courthouse where Arthur was originally scheduled to answer for $6 million he'd never touched, the fraud referral against Arthur J. Whitfield was formally withdrawn. The county attorney stood up, read a short statement acknowledging that forensic examination had established the guarantor signatures attributed to Mr. Whitfield were not genuine, and that the matter had been referred jointly with federal authorities toward the individual believed to be responsible. Arthur sat in the second row in his good flannel shirt, the same one he'd worn to Ethan's party, hands folded in his lap, and didn't say a single word until it was over. Then he turned to me, and all he said was, "Well, I suppose that settles that." 14 counties away, at 11:20 that same morning, FBI agents and Detective Castillo executed a warrant at Bellwood Cove's Naples Management Office, and simultaneously at my mother's home in Scottsdale. She was formally charged 11 days later, after a federal grand jury reviewed the evidence OSE's team compiled, with wire fraud under 18 U.S.C., paragraph 1343, aggravated identity theft under 18 U.S.C., paragraph 1028A, and bank fraud, along with a state charge of forgery tied specifically to the 2 guarantor documents Gregory Pierce had personally notarized. Gregory cooperated fully once the federal charges landed. He surrendered his notary commission voluntarily, and 6 weeks later was referred to the state bar for disciplinary review. He resigned from practice before the hearing could formally strip his license. Whether that makes him a coward or a man trying to salvage something at the last minute, I honestly don't know. I haven't spoken to him since. Pat Lindqvist was granted immunity in exchange for her full cooperation and testimony. She still sends Maya a Christmas card. I don't know what to do with that, so I let it sit on the counter every December and don't throw it away. My brother Nathaniel, who'd been serving as VP of Development at Ashworth Meridian, and who I genuinely believed had nothing to do with any of it, came to me 4 days after the warrants, white-faced with a folder of his own. His signature had shown up on 2 internal board resolutions authorizing the Meridian coastal disbursements, resolutions he swore he'd never seen, let alone signed. Dr. Cho examined those too. Forged, same pattern, same hand. "She used me the same way she used him," Nate said, meaning Arthur. And I watched my little brother, who I'd resented for years for being the one our mother never seemed disappointed in, realize in real time that being her favorite had never meant being safe from her. He testified for the prosecution 3 months later. He didn't have to. He wanted to. The company survived, technically. The $18 million in frozen assets, once the fraud was conclusively established, was released back under court supervision, the bulk of it restored to Ashworth Meridian's balance sheet, with a portion set aside by court order as restitution, and a separate settlement, which I insisted on personally and which the board didn't fight me on, that paid off every dollar remaining on Arthur and Eleanor's farmhouse mortgage and covered Eleanor's full hospital bill, 6 figures, without either of them ever seeing an invoice. My mother pleaded guilty 8 months later to avoid a trial that her own attorney told her, privately, she had almost no chance of winning. She was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution in full. The judge, reading the sentence, noted for the record that the case involved, in her words, a calculated decision to protect personal financial interests at the direct expense of an individual with no capacity to defend himself. A sentence I've read probably 30 times since because it's the closest thing to a public verdict on my entire childhood that I think I'll ever get. The country club revoked her membership before the plea deal was even finalized. Two of the women who'd been sipping Dom Perignon at Ethan's party, women who'd laughed along when my mother called Arthur and Eleanor a pair of rednecks, sent me handwritten notes afterward saying how shocked, just shocked, they'd been to hear the news. I didn't respond to either of them. Some silences say more than any letter could. My father, still in his chair, still mostly unable to speak clearly since the stroke, watched the news coverage with Maya sitting beside him one afternoon, and according to her, cried without making a sound for almost 20 minutes. I don't know exactly what was in that silence. Grief, relief, 30 years of things he'd never said out loud about the woman he married. I didn't ask. Some things you let a person keep. 10 months after that party, I stood on a small covered porch I'd built myself, badly, on the back of a modest house 40 minutes outside Beatrice, a smaller, simpler place Arthur and Eleanor chose themselves, paid off free and clear, close enough to their old land that Arthur still drives past it most mornings just to look at it. Eleanor was inside the kitchen humming something off-key, while Ethan banged a wooden spoon against a pot on the floor. Arthur handed me a beer and didn't say much, because he never does, and we watched the sun go down over land that, for the first time in 11 years, nobody could take from him on paper that wasn't real. You didn't have to do all this, he said eventually. You mortgaged your whole life for me once. I said. I was just returning the favor. Late, he nodded slowly, the way he does, like he was turning the sentence over in his hands to check the weight of it. Your mother, he said, she ever going to understand what she did? I thought about the sentencing hearing, about the judge's words, about a woman who, even in her final statement to the court, had used the phrase unfortunate misunderstanding to describe $6 million and a stranger's near heart attack. I don't think understanding was ever really the currency she dealt in, I said. I think it was always just about staying ahead of the consequences. She just finally ran out of road. Arthur didn't answer that. He just clinked his bottle against mine, quiet, the way men who've bled for each other do instead of saying anything at all. She spent 34 years teaching me that a name meant everything, that the Ashworth name opened doors, bought silence, bent the truth into whatever shape kept the family looking clean from the outside. It took one forged signature. On paper, she never thought anyone would read closely enough to question, to prove her wrong in a way no argument at that dinner table ever could have. She built a name out of appearances. In the end, it was a farmer's real name, the one she stole to save herself, that outlasted her.